here we are talking about coaching.
Yes.
And I'm super excited to have Eric Larson here. Eric, welcome.
Hi. I'm glad to be here. It's just morning for me, so I'm quite it's an energetic time of day for me. So you'll get that version.
Well, you're lucky. We have a good synergy then, because I'm shit in the mornings. And,
all right, right on.
my energy starts kicking in around this time, which is great.
Nice.
Cool. Well, this is one of our deep dives. I love talking about coaching, as you know, because we've been doing that for a little while.
Yeah.
Not publicly, though. And so something came up as we talked in private, and the notion of play came around. And it seemed like such a, not just a rich metaphor for how people learn, how people create boundaries. It requires presence. But also in terms of coaching and the coaching space, the coaching room, we are playing, we are perhaps role playing with clients, or clients get a chance to role play different versions of themselves. So it just seemed that there's so much rich material that we could explore when it comes to the notion of playing, that I got really excited to set this up.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know Eric, Eric, you're a coach with over 10,000 hours, I think, by now. You've been coaching for, 10 years?
I've been coaching for almost 15,
15,
but kind
right.
of had my certification for 10.
Mm-hmm. And you got, that's what I first got excited about. You said you trained ontologically, which is quite close to my existential training. But we're both aligned philosophically to some extent. Maybe could you just say a little bit about where you're approaching coaching from, what that is about, where are you talking from? What's your perspective? Just say a bit about yourself so people can get to know you a bit.
Yeah, good. It's a dream come true. I'm being interviewed about all the things I usually interview myself about, and but it's actually another person and maybe others here. So technically the school that I went to is called New Ventures West, which is in San Francisco, and has been around since sort of the early days of coaching, and comes. I don't even know if I like this lineage, but it's sort of in the lineage of Est, which is Werner Erhard, which is kind of a creepy thing a little bit, and now it's Landmark Forum, which is sort of a self-development thing. So it has sort of its lineage in that. But they consider it integral coaching, which is basically ontological coaching.
Why is it a bit awkward? Or what would you?
I have stuff around it. Like Est was in the 80s, and Werner Erhard is this very charismatic figure that a lot of people just sort of glommed onto almost as a cult, like a leader figure kind of person. And I think I don't know enough about the sort of history of that to say too much, but a lot of people, with a strong leader like that, you have people that camp out on one side and then they camp out on the other. He's amazing, and then he's a terrible beast. And there was a 60 Minutes program on him, which is a news show here that sort of exposed something or other, and then it was refuted, and there's all this stuff distracting from the real heart of his work, which is actually really fascinating. Anyway, the reason that I'm a little bit about it is it's just those qualities, that it has that, and it can be a little bit, it can feel a little bit weird. That's kind of it.
Where's the strength of it? Because there's something in there that really drew you in, and I wonder what is it about that, or about that lineage, that you think is particularly powerful when it moves into coaching?
Well, it goes right into the kind of the ontological sense, and so for people who might not kind of have that word in their vocabulary right now, ontological sort of refers to the way of being. Rather than epistemology, which is the way of knowing something. And so it really focuses on who this person is in the context of their life. and how that sort of leads to the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that they manifest in their day-to-day life. And so it really focuses on the person, and how that person, the influences that sort of conditioned that person to be that person in this way. And then the focus is less on like just a behavior change or just thinking different thoughts or just trying to feel better or anything like that. And it really focuses on changing the way that you be in your life.
The experience of being.
Exactly. And then that leads, of course, to different thoughts, different feelings, different behaviors. And in terms of integral coaching, which is kind of the what they called it at New Ventures West, it has to be integrated. It has to be practiced in order to be integrated. It's not just like, I had an insight and then now I'm different or something like that. And so it tends to take a longer term view. One of the phrases that I took away and still repeat often, although it's not perfect. I can already hear you objecting to it. So I'm going to say it's not perfect. I mean, I don't really camp out here, but it says change takes place at the pace of biology. And I really think that that's true when we're talking about like neurological change. Certainly there can be trauma and there can be what I call positive trauma. That's like a real powerful insight that can really lead to it. But at the end of the day, your body has to do different things and you have to be in different places, and that the brain responds to that in certain ways. So it sort of becomes integrated over time through practice, through deliberate practice, that kind of thing. Am I way off where we started? What was the question?
Well, I think it's always good to have some context on where somebody's coming from. And I think too little emphasis is often put on a coach's philosophy. At the core, how do we relate to somebody and what is the work about? Because I think it's important.
It is. I mean, and that's my whole philosophy in a nutshell is like, it's all about where I'm sort of coming from, how I'm seeing and understanding you as a human being in the world. So the first two questions they asked in my training were, one, what is a human being? Like, we don't know.
What is a human being?
What is a human being? Do you know?
Okay, but that's not the first question to the client. That's the first question.
No, that's the first question in my training. Good Lord, okay. No, people would be like, out of here. Like, they'd be like, are you fucking crazy? Like,
who are you? Is difficult enough.
Yeah, but what I loved about that is like we went right down to like I often say I want to be the stupidest person in the room. Like I want to be the guy in the room who doesn't know what a human being is. Do you know what I mean? I mean, of course, the truth is I'm not a blank slate. And we can talk about this later about like whether I have an agenda or things like that. But I'm not a blank slate. I mean, I can't pretend that I am. But, and it maybe gets to the play a little bit. I do want to play like an innocent. Because if I play like an innocent, then everything they see is like fresh to me. I'm like, every word, it means like the best question is like, what do you mean? Because I have no idea what they mean. And if I took that to an extreme, we wouldn't get a half an inch in any conversation. Could be like, what do you mean? What do you mean?
It's like, it's a much more sophisticated why. Why?
Yeah, it is.
Why?
And it's so useful to be able to actually reflect on that because we don't generally pause and sort of reflect on, well, what life experiences and where did I get that linguistic distinction from? And what are my, what are all the life experiences packed into that single word? And, but pretty soon you become like a politician trying to like mince words and it becomes a little bit laborious, but you could do it. Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting. So I think that philosophical grounding of how do I see another person? I don't know anything. Yeah. Is kind of, and if I don't know anything, then I'm available to see, there seems to be a form there. We call that a body. There seems to be sounds coming out of the mouth, and those form words, and those have meaning. Like I try to be that sort of innocent, and then try to kind of. It's easy when you're listening. We talked in coaching about like the people's their story and all of that, and it really makes like whatever their story is really fresh because I never want to say like, yeah, I know what you mean. because I mean, that's false. I mean, I can't possibly.
Well, I guess what we're trying to say when we say that is I can relate to what you're saying, and I think I have enough grasp of what you're telling me to get a sense for where you are with this.
Yeah, and that's I mean, I really get caught up in language, or I can in my head. In my coaching, it's fluid. I've sort of I have a way of confirming, like, yeah, I can relate, and I tend to be a pretty feeling person, so I can kind of see if we're if we're on the same page, and or do my best, and so we can continue the coaching. So it's not this herky jerky thing, and then I only sort of bring up, like, well, what do you mean when I see that there's something in their way that's contributing to their suffering? And when I see that, I want to be like, I don't know about that. Can you tell me some, not suspicious, but like, what do you mean by that? Because then they have to pause and do something they've never done and go, well, what do I mean by that? And then, all sorts of interesting things start to happen. The end.
Sorry, that got cut over.
Yeah.
I think this is where we have like a foot already in the play, because what we're talking about here is to relate phenomenologically, like to really look into what's the experience of that person in front of me. What are they experiencing? Bracketing everything we think we know about what those words mean, or what that experience is. Really go into this kind of child's mind and really be present, and not take anything for granted, which when you see, especially very young children play, that's what you often see. They're just completely present, they're figuring things out. They're not really taking anything for granted. And not just in play, but also when a child explores, when they talk to you, when they want to know something, when they just follow their curiosity, which I think is such a core skill, or such a core attitude of a coach. If you're just being present and curious, then beautiful things happen. So this is where all the parallels between play and coaching already surface.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And I think that's that taking nothing for granted and curiosity that is the native to children. I mean, they just, because they don't have vocabulary yet, they don't have the conceptual framework, they don't have a prefrontal cortex fully formed, they don't have all of this stuff. So they are sort of free, during this early years to be able to do this. Of course, lots of stuff is starting to happen in connections, and they're starting to behave in different patterned ways, but, it's much more sort of like that. And I think we're ruined by education and language. Of course, there's such great benefits to that, but there's sort of a paradox that happens. Like, if you want the benefit of education and vocabulary and language and stuff, like, you kind of have to give up this innocence. But that's where I want to mess around a bit. It's like, but do you? I mean, because once you become aware that innocence has been lost, you can not get it back, because you can't unknow what you know, and you can't undo the neurological connections. But
you can't?
There's a way.
Because I think unknowing and unlearning is quite an important part of coaching work quite often.
Well, I think, so the way that I see it, and I don't think it's opposed to what you say, and I don't know, so you might actually correct me here, is like, we're always behaving, right? And so there isn't really like a stop and break moment, like, because in the moment we're breaking a pattern or a connection, we're forming another one. So there's never like pause, stop, and then now we're over here and reforming. So it's just dynamic. It's kind of always. Does that make sense? I don't know if the distinction is even meaningful, but
I'm just thinking, like, if we just take this as an example of somebody comes to coaching to work on something, and this is, I think, what you mean by the kind of curse of education, thinking that we know things. We now know things, but it proved to be not helpful in where we need to go or want to go. We learned how the world works. We build a certain worldview, or if you do this, then that, and all of a sudden it isn't working anymore. And then somebody comes to see a coach. And I think this is where I might want to challenge what you just said in terms of, well, there can be a slowing down and a pausing by either going to see a coach or by just making some time to reflect. Some people have that on holiday. Some people have that in a couple of hours of reflection or in a weekend, or, we make some time, we kind of tune into that, and then we try to move forward, doing things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So no quarrel with that. I mean, I think that's exactly how I see coaching is like, it's something of an alternative universe, or we could call it sacred space, or you could call it, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could, but it's like, it's not that it's, and I think if we take coaching as a word that comes from the sports universe, like it's a really apt metaphor. It's like you're out there playing the game of your life, and then for coaching, you come on. It's like a different space. So it's a practice space, or it's a huddle on the sidelines or something. But it's sort of, and it's a little bit untrue, right? Because we're still in the flow of our life, but we kind of arbitrarily agree, right? Together, we're now kind of doing this huddle off to the side, and we can slow time down. And you can pause, and you can go in, and you can zoom in, and you can zoom out. I use a lot of film metaphors, as you know, in my kind of thinking, and we can do all of that. And then we can imagine, well, if you turn left instead of right, or if you did that and that, and then we can zoom back out and say, well, if you did that, given what you're talking about wanting in your life, or how you want to live your values, or whatever it is that more like that, or is it less like that? Okay, it's less like that. What about this? And you can kind of do these sorts of things in coaching. And I think that the kicker here, and you sort of said it, is like with awareness. Like that's there's like this, this sort of meta awareness that we can develop as adults that we don't have. That's part of what's absent in kind of innocent land when you're a kid, is this sort of this self-awareness, whatever the brain development, or I don't know, the super ego, I don't know, what are we talking about, but that thing that's kind of above the ability to watch. Once we can sort of, we can sort of access that, then it does become possible to sort of change and reorganize our stories and our behavior.
So it strikes me that there's kind of two different ways of playing, if you wanted to like put it into different camps, but like those two different kinds of playing just kind of came to me. The one is where we're in the game and we're learning as we're going along. It's like a continuous expansion and growth, and just, we keep on playing because we're in it. And we learn as we do, and then in real time integrate what we've learned and then apply it. It's like when a skier starts at the top of a mountain, and when he gets to the bottom, he's like 3 times as good as he was in the beginning. It's like then it gets more incremental. But in the beginning we make huge steps. So this is a very flowy. We're in it as we're playing, versus the kind of, okay, let's take a time out. Right. Let's go on a sideline. Let's go in a huddle. Let's take some time to reflect. What the hell just happened? I've spent a lot of time in like parks doing freestyle moves and like snowboards, and sometimes you bail and you go out and you reflect and you think, what just happened? And you use your mind and you use the time out. Maybe you have that conversation with a coach in sports or in any other way, and then you go back into the game. And I'm not sure. And if any of those is better or more productive or more effective, but it just struck me that there's two different ways of playing.
Yeah. And I think there's actually a third thing that we could say happens. Like if you do the latter, like the kind of time out with a coach, huddle up. And of course, we're always doing the former, which is we're just in the flow of our life. That when one of the things that I try to negotiate with clients is that you can kind of bring this into this, So have you had clients say, well, there's a little Yannick on my shoulder? Yeah. So that's it. So we import. So it's like we import the awareness or the kind of consciousness. And I do think it's a shift of consciousness. It's not other than that. And then we start to import it into this. It's a little bit like lucid dreaming. Right? We sort of, this is the dream, or well, I'm not sure what the dream is. I'll drop that.
But we're conscious
we're like, but then we'll sort of have the lab where we're developing this conscious. Then we start to bring it into this, and I'll have clients say like, and then it happened. Like it's an awakening. They go, oh, that thing that we were talking about, right? There's now a neural connection to the conversation that we had, which was more like, let's pause and look at you in your life doing all this. And then they're in their life later that week or something, and they're going, and I remembered, I remembered that I don't want to do this thing. Every time my partner says something and I get that feeling and I argue back, that's a train wreck. Mm-hmm. And I remembered it was a train wreck and I didn't know what to do, but I didn't do anything, which is an improvement because it's a break in the pattern. Mm-hmm. And then we might come back and go, oh, that's awesome. Like, you broke the pattern. Like, if we were to see the next little scene, like, what other options do you have in that moment? Arguing, isn't good. Pausing a little bit better. Like, and then you can kind of play that scene out a little bit more. And then the next time they're in that kind of situation, if you've taught them to recognize it, not based on the content, but based on the somatic experience, based on the way that it feels to be there, then they catch themselves and then they can play out something different and report. I mean, it's just fascinating.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I think these are those moments when that players in sports, I think sometimes talk about, is when time seems to be slowing down and they seem to have this other perspective that sees them from the top. It's like, oh, I see what I'm doing, so now in real time I can actually change it. That's the lucid dreaming connection. It's just like, if the idea behind lucid dreaming is like you're dreaming and you're dreaming, and you can, in knowing you're dreaming, you can manipulate your actions. It's like a waking version of that. So, but then there's I think because I'm really fascinated by flow states. That's what kind of got me into positive psychology. And there's a great book by Stephen Kotler called The Rise of Superman. That takes free skiers and the progress that they've made in the last 15 years or so, enormous progress compared to something like, figure skating or diving or something like that. Yeah. And they've looked at what happens when people are in those flow states, because it seems that in those flow states, you're not conscious of yourself. You're not having that moment of choice. You're just kind of flowing from one moment to the next. And people do things in like a big wave or on a mountain that they had never done before in their lives, that goes against what their training was, but they just do it instinctively. And I think that's when we're so present in play or in performance as like a super high level of play, if you wanted to see it like that. And all of a sudden we do things we've never done before, not as a conscious choice, but something that just makes sense in the moment.
Yeah. One of the things that's really fascinating is, again, this paradox, because what children have the innocence in some ways, and I don't know if his research bears this out or talks about it, but it feels familiar from the flow world and research anyways. Like, kids, one way to describe them is that they're in flow. They're in an alpha state or whatever it is. And you just go, oh, and then that flow starts to get interrupted by the big people in their life and, thwarted expectations and things like that. And then that,
if they manage to get through, because how often have people called out for their kids and they just don't hear them because they're so focused on their play.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. So what was I going to say?
Sorry.
You're talking about flow, and then there's
it's instinctive. And
the instinctive. Yeah. Oh, because one of the things, but children, now this isn't perfect either, because I think about when kids can start to sort of deliberately practice. I think like Mozart's a good example. He's practicing at 3, 4, 5 years old. So he's maybe a bit of an exception, but children are sort of in flow, but unskilled. And in order to be skilled, now I'm not going to put all my weight behind this, but in order to be skilled, you kind of have to not be in flow. Like, you kind of have to have a bigger picture and kind of see where you're going in time, because flow is partly like, you're not really in the past, you're not really in the future. You're kind of here, fully immersed in it, not unaware that there is past or future, but sort of immersed. I don't know.
Flow, I mean, at least according to the theory, has one of the conditions for flow is that you have a very clear idea of what the goal is, of what the purpose is here. You're not focused on any outcome, but you have a very clear idea that, in surfing, it's to not fall off, and ride the wave. And it's getting down the mountain and not die, or to score the goal.
Yeah. There's do you know deep practice, that the notion of deep practice?
No, I don't think so.
There's a really good book. I'm not going to be able to remember it. The Talent Code.
Uh-huh.
So it's good. It's a good book. And they talk about the notion of deep practice, which is more or less what we're talking about. Like deep practice would be something like a coaching meeting where you do kind of slow these things down and you're sort of pinpointing the moment where the unskillful behavior sort of arises. And then you're, suggesting maybe a way of, this is how I work, sort of suggesting an alternative move in that moment and to practice it. And you can kind of call that to mind and then practice it and sort of integrate it. And he talks about, I don't know where I'm going with this. He talks about deep practice. Yeah. So it requires this kind of attention, but they know exactly what they're doing. And it's like the flow state stuff. It's like it's at a level of challenge that's just beyond where you are.
Yeah.
There's a risk. You have to kind of traverse, there's I can't do this, but then you can and you can and you can. And then your comfort, you grow, from that.
Yeah. So when kids play, or when anybody plays really, you talked about like, well, they're still kind of low skilled, but skill is always defined by the challenge, right? And the challenge needs some sort of goal or focus of the play. That's why I think most games have they're defined. There's some boundaries. There's some rules or something. Although in child's play, often there don't seem to be any rules at all, or at least none that the big people can be aware of. And yet children are so immersed in it. That's something I'm super interested in.
Yeah, and that's a good question. Like, and I'm trying to think back in my own case, like, I without any evidence or having thought about it much, I think like there's a sense that there's boundaries or there's rules or there's an expectation that's sort of formed. There's a finiteness to the game, like even of children, and they kind of know when it's over. Or when it goes, and kids who aren't able to recognize that, I think, suffer as a result, if they're not able to perceive like when a game is over and then now you have two kids who have different expectations and the other one's moved on, that can be quite, I'm getting into my personal history too, but that's part of the reason I'm interested in this.
Well, this is such a rich metaphor. I just want to kind of pause here because there's so many parallels to adults play as well. First of all, the kind of what is the game? Is life the game? Or yes, but also there's so many different games within the game that are very well defined. And then there's this overarching game, which, you wouldn't really call a game perhaps, but like there's nothing really defined, or people are still trying to figure it out. And then also there's people who are playing, and then you're coming in and you want to play with them, but maybe they don't tell you what the rules are, or they just don't tell you about some of the rules, or they move on. And then all of a sudden the rules change, but nobody told you.
Oh man, yeah, no, exactly.
You think you're still playing, but you look ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so fun to look at life through this lens, because it's happening all the time. It's such a useful and rich kind of conceptual framework to kind of put around our experience. So we talked about, and I told you about, but I don't remember if you've read the James Carse, the Infinite Games.
Yes, well, parts of it. It's been a while ago. Also, Simon Sinek picked that up with
so Simon Sinek has kind of popularized it in terms of like capitalism and culture of capitalism and that stuff, which Carse sort of touches on. But Carse is like an NYU professor, and he was in a conversation with a bunch of colleagues who were game theorists, and he realized that they were, so to speak, they were talking about game theory and their specific disciplines, whatever they were, economics and history, whatever. But what they didn't realize was that they were in the matrix, so to speak, as they were talking about game theory. So what his sort of contribution, I think, is partly what you're touching on, which is like, there's actually an infinite game. There's, and you could call that kind of a spiritual realm, or you could call it something else. And he ends the book. Spoiler alert, don't listen to me if you plan on reading the book. he ends the book with this just one line, and he says, "And there is but one infinite game."
Oh, really?
And I was like, bam, like that, something about that was like, yeah. But he doesn't say, "And it is God." I mean, he never goes there, or "and it is," whatever. Oh, I've just messed up my camera. He doesn't qualify it with anything. He just, "and there is," and so it's a wonderful, like, kind of mysterious, playful way to end the book. But I think he's saying something really important. Now, Cynic turns that into something like mission, something like your personal mission, or
but because that's where it comes from.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes enough sense to make it functional in the world that he's talking about. And I think we need to explode even that idea because I want it to remain mysterious. The thing I quote most often is the first line of the Daodejing, which is, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. So anytime you put language, you're sort of fucked. So I'm gonna stick to that. But he does put some language to it, and he says, an infinite game is like is something. It's a mountain with no top. It's an aspiration that actually can't be achieved. So.
Yeah. However, I do want to jump in there because it's really important to me that people regard this as something incredibly positive. Because very often a game you cannot win seems like excruciating or pointless or like a torture. Yep. And really what they're talking about is that's the game you can keep playing.
Yeah, that's it. So this is so great. I'm so glad you're here to say that as I kind of speed along, because I also believe that. And I can get a little comfortable with my existential side and forget that it can be perceived as dark and gloomy and hopeless and all that. So I'm really thankful for you. And it's so the other, I'm just going to quote James Carse from now on. He said, because I just love this stuff and it's still fresh in my mind. It's just been in the last 6 months or so that I encountered it. And he says, what's the quote that's coming to mind, he says, that's not going to be the right quote, but it's if you have to play, then you can't play.
Okay. Then we would need to look at what does play and play mean in this.
Yeah, I mean, and my interpretation is like if you anything that you have to do, I've got to take out the garbage, I have to do this, and with that's a mindset, right? That's sort of a conceptual framework with which you're approaching the given activity of your life. If it's a have to, then there's no what I'm going to call for our conversation, because play isn't an activity; it's a attitude. It's like the spirit of play is how I call it. If you have to do something, there's no room for the spirit of play. So look at any teenager that has to do chores, like.
Yeah, it resonates with flow theory, by the way. Another one of the conditions for flow is that it's intrinsically motivated. Yeah. It's not something you do for a reward or for an outcome. You actually do the activity for the activity's own sake. Yep. And that's what you see in children. There's there might be an outcome to the game, but that's not what they play. It's like I met with a friend to play chess in a pub the other day, and I used to play a lot of chess, and then for a very long time I didn't really play anything, but I love playing chess. Yeah. And some people I play and they try to beat me and I try to keep playing. And there was a situation where at some point I was so far ahead, I could just bring it home and win. But that would be no fun. But then you end the game. To me.
And So, that's
I sacrificed my queen and they couldn't understand why. And they're like, hi, and then I ended up losing. And they're
because
like, I beat you.
Right. And it's like, great. Yeah, exactly. So that's the point that he was making. You brought me back to the point, which is just like, the point of infinite play is to play. Mm-hmm. It goes on forever. It's like you play to play. And then to kind of call us back to where we sort of made this diversion in the first place, the infinite game contains all finite games. But one finite game doesn't contain any infinite games. Like it doesn't, that's probably not quite perfect either. But like the general idea is that because people will ask me this, like to bring it back to coaching context, because I speak in terms of values, and values for me are chosen directions for your life. They're kind of ways of being that you want to embody. I want to be kind. I want to be, courageous, these sorts of things, which could be qualified as sort of infinite games.
These are infinite games, but you can play them within a finite game, such as work. I mean, business is an infinite game because you can't win. But if you look at the game of business in terms of producing a certain result by this time next year, then you can play an infinite game. But within that, you're aspiring to be a kind or creative or productive or friendly or effective person.
Yep. And one of the things that Cynic says, and I think rightly, is that people forget that business
it's an infinite game.
It messes up business, so they end up focusing kind of on the wrong things, and then it's just this growth for growth's sake, which is like obviously perilous, but like we're stuck in this sort of Milton Friedman kind of thing. Anyway, so you can, and that's where it comes back to coaching. Like when we're focused on values, which is the kind of one and the same for infinite game, the way that I've thought about it in coaching, and people will be like, well, because they'll take issue with it if I'm saying to them, like, here's the agreement I want to be in about what values are, because it's distinguished from goals, it's distinguished from the rules that we learned from family, culture, religion, and the rest of it. And I want to carve out this other territory, which people mostly get and they agree to. And I say, this is kind of what I mean. And they say, well, but I had someone ask me this last week. He's like, well, it was sort of the kind of like, well, maybe it's all just fucked and we're just, it doesn't matter, anything like that. And I was like, no, you can play any game that you want. You can play the go get the mail game. You can play the make love game. You can play the $1 million game. You can get the, achieve the next title in your job game, but just don't get confused that there's no there. You're going to get there and you're going to have whatever joyous experience that one gets from having achieved a goal.
Yeah.
And then you're going to wake up the next day. So I said that there's a story after the credits roll in the movie. and it's not, there's no sort of like, ta-da, and then it just ends and then we just die and float away. I mean, you could, but then
there are a lot of endings in people's lives. There are episodes, there's an end of a scene in the movie and then the next scene starts. And I think we have that a lot. And in a way, that's very much what a lot of coaching is about. A lot of coaching that I see out there, it's based on some version of SMART goals. It's like some version of define an endpoint and then achieve it. And I think it's okay to live your life in episodes, to go from one end goal to the next end goal, then set another goal and then set another goal. A lot of people go through life forever like that. They're just, as soon as they achieve something and the finite game has ended, they're like, okay, what's the next game? What are we going to play next? And I think it's sometimes it can, when we listen to those kind of more philosophically inclined infinite game type of characters, it can feel wrong if we play finite games, and I don't think it is. And I think a lot of coaching is about finite games and then looking forward. But I think it's a really good argument that there is coaching that is really well placed, that doesn't have the T in SMART, that isn't necessarily time bound, where the T is literally infinite.
Yeah. And that's, I absolutely agree. And there's no purpose to saying like, well, it should be infinite or it should be finite or anything. So I think the limitations on both of those. What I'm sort of interested in as a coach is like, if there's something outside of the Truman Show, I want them to know about it, because then that they have choice. Right. And I think, and if you don't know that there's something out there, then you can't make choices that include it. And so without, and this is partly, we could have a rich conversation about, is it my agenda or anything like that? But it's like, if I live in Minneapolis, I'm not going to pretend that Wisconsin doesn't exist, because indeed it does for me and the client, I'm pretty sure. And if it doesn't, I'm open to Wisconsin being wiped off the map, especially for this election. But anyway, that's a separate matter. So it's like, I want them to be aware, we can get pretty philosophical about it. I'll tell you what has happened in the thousands of hours of coaching is that people are they like Truman at the end of the Truman Show. It is an awakening. It is not simple, and it is not just joyous, but it is freeing to understand that they aren't stuck in infinite games or in finite games, which until they're in these kind of conversations are often, the expectations sort of set by, family, set by society, the kind of convenient, and those have function. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But the way so many people that I've worked with relate to those is it's an expectation. And the most you can ever do with an expectation is meet it. It's like, and then you get a pat on the head, and then it's like, and what? And that experience, which just so many people that I've worked with have come to, and that's in fact the crisis that I call it a breakdown in coaching. That's the breakdown, is they keep getting the thing, getting the salary, getting the girl, getting the whatever, and they keep going, but and what? Like, and what? And then they come into coaching, it's a new conversation. You say, yeah, that just works for what it works for. It's great. But there's this other thing over here, and it doesn't mean you have to stop playing finite games. They'll show so much fun. Chess, basketball, hiking, it's great. But there is this other thing, and it's a revelation to them, because they go, oh, and it's within their control, which people really, really like, and one of my little quips is like, you can be in Paris or you can be in prison and you can still behave kindly. Like, there isn't anything about the external or internal circumstances that prevents you from playing your infinite game or living your values.
Is it more difficult to be kind in Paris or in prison? What do you think?
Well, it depends. I don't know. And then I get into that segues into my recommending people read Man's Search for Meaning. So, because
Viktor Frankl.
Yeah. And Viktor Frankl sits like right here. And I just think, man, if he can do that, like, I can, like, it gives me a lot of courage in my life to be like, look, I'm not starving. I'm not cold and sick and in a concentration camp with a gun in my face, that's where I feel so, then the gratitude comes up, and you just go, oh, wow. And it gives me courage that, like, and now, my wife and I are in so many conversations about, I think, helpful, not kind of catastrophizing conversations about what if. What if the political situation turns out the way that we don't want it? What if it continues in this way? What if they continue to give involuntary surgeries to women that, taking out their uterus in prison, like, this shit that's happening. And we just go, well, okay, let's just play the game of carrying that out for a while. What would we do? And it's terrifying. That's true. And like, I have a whole fear response, the way any nervous system with, and I don't see a point at which I couldn't play. I don't see any end to that. And not, I don't take it seriously, or not, it's like this, I don't see any place where there wouldn't be enough room for the spirit of play, that kind of,
could you,
part of it.
How would you encapsulate or frame or describe in a few sentences the spirit of play?
Bastard.
Seems something very well worth developing.
Yeah. So let me see what arises. Dead air is no good, so I'll just say some things. So what the
silence is pretty valuable, I would say.
Well, it is. Well, for our dear listeners, I don't know. We might lose them, and then what?
Or they get some time to reflect, and they're like,
there you go. Okay, fine.
This is it.
Maybe they'll figure it out. They'll tell us. If you're on Facebook and you can tape it and you can type it in, let us know. Did you get my gift?
I got lots of gifts from you, but I'm not sure. I don't know
but like
specific one you're referring to.
In the post, like by delivered.
No, I haven't gotten a post from you.
Do you get mail where your address, like on the, you get mail from, I mean, you do go regularly and get it?
Not sure. I have two, but I haven't been to the office in a while.
Oh, you should go.
I'm so curious now.
I'll just leave that. I'll leave that out there. I was going to say that. I was like, not because I want you to be like, oh, thank you so much. Because I'm like, oh, I really think he might not get it until the pandemic is gone or something. Anyway, that aside, what I wanted to say is something like the spirit of play. A synonym would be like something's always possible. And so it's like an insight or a knowing that whatever circumstances or conditions might be coming together to give rise to this moment, that's the choice is possible, that something's possible. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of maybe a little bit more technical way of saying it. And it has
play as an attitude, you said, no?
Play as an attitude. So I talked a little, I think, in our initial conversation about this idea of neutrality. Mm-hmm. Did I? I think so. And neutrality, a synonym for neutrality would be a blank canvas. Mm-hmm. A synonym would be silence. A synonym would be, an empty parcel of land, something that represents
the existential nothingness.
Yeah, the nothingness, but like in a really positive way. Like you can posit something into emptiness or into nothingness.
That's right.
With your imagination.
Yeah,
amazing. And that never stops. I mean, maybe save brain damage or something like that, which, okay, that's part of the experience too. But it's like you can really paint on anything on an empty canvas, and that function or that something like gives rise to this spirit. I mean, it's pretty hard to, it's insubstantial.
Yeah, and I remember when you said that, I had this very clear imagery of a canvas, that when we see art as play, for example, or we have a canvas there and we can do a lot with that canvas. We can play with filling that canvas, whether that canvas is literally a canvas that we paint on, made out of some material, or whether that canvas is, a human mind or, an environment that's in front of us. The canvas has some givens. The material might be of a certain kind that is like difficult or more easy to paint on. You might have a certain set of colors or, utensils that you can use in order to put colors on the canvas. But regardless of what the canvas is made of, and regardless of what you have in your art tool bag, you can play. And that's why I related so much with hip hop when I grew up, because it was literally didn't matter what you had, you could always play. Yeah. And if you had nothing, you just did a music with your mouth and you just made a rhythmic sound.
You like scat, you can do,
exactly. Yeah, and you can do the same thing. Like if you have anything that makes a mark, you can paint.
Yeah.
And it literally doesn't matter what the canvas is. So I think this is what we mean, that you can always play. Yeah. There's always a canvas.
Yeah. So now I have a question for you, the academic. And I'll explain if we need to figure out why this question is arising in my mind. Is language another existential given?
Not in terms of the literature. I think it's a good question, because some people don't. Well, we have language. If we define language as a means to communicate,
it's like a symbolic system that it intends to communicate. That's kind of I guess how I mean it.
Yeah, I mean there's words, but it's impossible not to communicate. I'm like, well, there's some people who don't speak.
So is communication?
But there's nobody who doesn't communicate.
Is a communication an existential given? Not meaningful communication, right? Strictly, but like, is there anything that we do that doesn't broadcast, that doesn't communicate? And if so, does that fit into the
existence comes before communicating anything. Right. So in that sense, it's not an existential given.
It's not woven into the
It's not woven into the philosophy.
An afterthought.
I think it's impossible to like existence precedes essence is what Sartre said. It's like first and foremost we exist, and then we communicate something.
Okay, but existence itself isn't communicating anything because it doesn't. There's nothing else. It doesn't refer to anything.
Communication is not part of the fabric of existence.
Yeah. I get that.
But it comes with being human.
Yeah, it's like it's definitely going to be there, but it doesn't. It's not the canvas. It's the paint.
Right.
Or whatever mark we might make out. Okay, good. I'm glad we got that settled. I thought I had you and Irving Yalom on the ropes here.
But this is so great because like imagine you have a pencil and it's like kind of fucked and like it doesn't really like you have to sharpen it in order to make something more exquisite and more sophisticated. Yeah. And maybe you don't know about the concept of sharpening a pencil. And you're frustrated because you're trying to create great art, but you just kind of ran out of the capacity that your pencil has. Yeah. And all of a sudden, somebody shows you that you can sharpen your pencil, and all of a sudden, your world just brightens up because now you can paint all of these finer lines, and you can create something that is so much more sophisticated and detailed and exciting.
That's what coaches are pencil sharpeners.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, or like, hey, what's that over there? And all of a sudden you find this old box full of like watercolors that you hadn't looked at in 20 years. And you're like, oh, I forgot I had that. Oh, let's play, and this is why I love the space so much. It's like just pointing your attention. It's not necessarily that the tool, often the coach is portrayed as this person who gives you the tools. Sometimes that might be true in terms of certain cognitive techniques or like certain ways, maybe a piece of education. Right. But very often, like the client already has the tools. They maybe have forgotten about it or, don't really know how to use them or didn't recognize it as a tool. Yeah, that's one of the things that makes me think about, and I've been doing some training with coaches recently, and this kind of question comes up because people are very faithful to the ICF of like, like the coach kind of stands back and doesn't kind of offer anything. And I like, there's something about that way of the way that people understand it. I don't know about the ICF or their intentions, but like the way people come to understand it is like, it's not nuanced enough somehow. And so I start, because they're in the coaching that I'm training them with, like we work with like the evidence-based practices, right? And so we're making a proposition which says there are things that work to reduce suffering, right? Like that can help people. And we have this thing called literature, and we agree that says something, that communicates something. And so here they are. And there are things like being aware, like that's as sort of the evidence is borne out that being aware in a kind of particular way can, that matters. And, taking action in alignment with your values can kind of lead to these things. So we do that. And people are like really reluctant at first to be like, ooh, I can't tell somebody that there are values, or I can't tell somebody that there are thoughts that are happening. And one, I'm like, yeah, but you already are, because people talk about the saboteur or the inner critic, or what do you can't get away just because it's metaphorical doesn't mean it's not an actual process cognitively that's actually happening that we can study and have studied and found out to be something we can manipulate. But, oh geez, where did I go? This is too exciting. I get really excited. So now where did I go? What was I saying, Yannick? Well, we were talking about canvases and...
well, we're miles from a canvas.
We're talking about tools and
tools. Yeah, that was it. So they're reluctant to do this. Anyway, the big point is like, I'll get to the point, which is very simple, which is I think about it as I'm giving them vocabulary to build context so that they see the field of play. And then they can do things on the field of play once they know it. So if someone comes to me and they don't know the name of a tree, and I say, that's a tree, and that's a bird, and that's the sky, and that's the ground, especially if you're talking to adults, they go, oh, And then they can start to they're facile. They can start to do things on that.
That reminds me of a really key moment I've had in my development, where I was working with my very first coach. And we talked about how play allows us to see or experience or create or play with boundaries. And I had this experience of a boundary, and then my coach listened to me talk and said, so you have a portfolio career, or something along those lines. And I'm like, a what? Because I had never heard that term. That was quite early. And I'm like, because I always struggled with society wanting me to be a master at something, of like doing something, climbing one tree to the top, and really specialize. And I always struggled with specializing because I'm quite the multi-potentialite that I now have vocabulary for, but I didn't have it at the time. So I felt inadequate. I felt boxed in. I felt like the way I was being was not okay. And all of a sudden, the portfolio career term came around. And I'm like, oh, I'm okay. There's others. And then Emily Wapnick came in with multi-potentialites and, generalist. And now they have a whole array of words that kind of describe people who have different specialities and integrate. And that we have unique strengths because of it. And so all of a sudden, this simple, like this providing of a vocabulary allowed me to change my game and be comfortable, because I realized there are different boundaries. There is a different canvas that I can use, and like all of a sudden some of the rules changed because there were perceived rules that some people who like specialism made, and I felt I didn't belong there.
I just love that. I mean, it's like once you give it the name, then like then what issues forth from that is a whole new set of possibilities or possible choices that you can make that kind of organize themselves. And there is this sense, in those moments, my equivalent to those moments is like, the world is suddenly reorganized and you're like, holy shit, like I see, that I didn't even see that as a thing, but that's a thing. And then I can relate to it and I can do things. And my version of that is I was maybe 28 years old. And it was the smallest thing, but I remember right where I was in San Francisco. I was in the 4th floor of this building. I was in a conference room and I was on a conference call and somebody just said the word process. And it totally shifted everything for me, because the way I had been relating to things was all about like in a finite way. I got to get to something. Like I've got to become someone. I've got to do that, whatever it was, even if it was, and it was never clear to me what the hell that was, partly because I kind of rebelled against anyone else's suggestion about what that should be for me. So it was you feel like you're going mad if that's the world that you're in, because it's so limited. And then he said like, no, it's really a process. And I was like, boom. Ooh. And then I suddenly saw like, because if I shift my focus to attending to what now, and then what does that lead to? And then what now? And what now? I mean, it's an entirely different way of experiencing your life. And it was like, boom. So in integral coaching, we call that, I mean, you can call it paradigm, you can call it mindset, you can call it that. We have a technical term, structure of interpretation. And when we get a new structure, we can play a whole different game. Mm-hmm. And I say, like, if you walk onto a baseball field with a helmet, with a face mask and a helmet and a hockey stick, like people are going to look at you funny. But now if you go next door to a sheet of ice where there are lines and there's this little black disc, now that makes sense. And so for you, it was like you were in hockey gear on a baseball field, and then suddenly it was like, sweetheart, you belong here. And you're like,
they're like, oh, this is totally me. It's like me at my first drum and bass party. I'm like, this is the way I've been dancing. I just look silly in other parties.
Now you have a context where it makes sense, And so building context for people so that they can start to make, and adults will often make those connections for themselves, and they go, oh my goodness, which is so important with coaching. I think back to the kind of SMART goal sort of coaching, it's like you're likely to miss out on all the richness that exists. And it's a little more chaotic and a little less structured, or it feels like that at first. To just like, I'm going to help you continue to follow the prescribed path that's sort of out in your head. And it's like, yes, there's value in it, but there's something over here that's liberating, freeing, that's like, and it gets into that sort of infinite spiritual kind of realm or something that's quite different.
Yeah, and I've recently talked to Peter Hawkins, who wrote, among many other things, a book on systemic coaching. And there's a real interesting movement that coaches should definitely go and check out, because he told me that when you coach somebody, you're never coaching individuals, and you're not the one doing the coaching. You know, and that systemic element now in the context of what we're talking about, play, is so important, because when you work with somebody, particularly in an organization, but could be any other context that is relatively well defined. You know, if it's a small organization or a small group of people and a well-defined tasks, it's much more easier to figure out what the rules of the environment are. What is the system, and which rules does the system adhere to?
What's the game?
Exactly. So when that gets more complex, because maybe it's a bigger system, bigger organization, or life as a whole, you know, then it can be really difficult to figure out what the rules are. Sherry Carter Scott, another coach I've been working with recently, she wrote a book that's literally called "If Life Were a Game, These Are the Rules."
Hey.
And so I love that process when somebody comes to coaching to help them figure out what the rules are, but I've never put it in that kind of language. And I thought that's probably something that people can really relate to, because everybody has an experience of playing a game. You know, and knowing when the rules are clear, it's easy to win. And if you have certain strengths that are conducive to the rules and how the game is structured, then you're going to be doing better at it. And if you're coming in and you're starting much later than other people, and they already build up resources, and you don't know what the rules are, and, you know, also you're not particularly good at the kind of skill that this game is requiring, then it's really difficult to enjoy being in this game. And there's so many people in life and at work where that's the case, but they haven't made the connections. So I think that game metaphor is super sweet.
It's like, it's an organizing principle, which when you have it and you see its kind of simplicity on the other side of the complexity, you go, oh. And then it's like, one, you have a choice. You can be like, I don't want to play that game. You know, like, and people do that with work. They'll be like, you know, they'll come in and they'll like complain, well, it's so political and it's all this. And all they're doing is naming the rules of the game, but they have an attitude about it and they have resistance about it. And I'm just like, yeah, it is that way. You know, but what's the, you know, and then we can explore, well, why is it that you're feeling, well, it shouldn't be that way. And you go, maybe, but it is that way. So then you can sort of shift or support people in kind of, I say, going to the balcony and looking over and going, oh, the size of the field is this shape and there are these positions and that, and like that has no there's no good, bad, right, wrong qualities to that. It's just so. And then when they see it, then they can stand and go, well, so that's the game. Do you want to play it? You know, and drop the attitude about it. And then they can go, yeah. Or no, and then you say, great, you don't? Then like let's start there in our conversation. What do you want to do? And then the values can be a great place to start, so that they don't have to wait to find the right thing. They can go, oh, my game, the first game to organize is this one. You know, where you go, where you're congruent with your own values, and people have kind of a pretty sophisticated understanding of what it's like. Like, a lot of people, like, integrity is a value that they've never named before. It's really painful when they say they're going to do something and then they don't do it.
You made the rules and now you broke the rules.
Yeah. I mean, it's inherently, there's something very, and I don't know what, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on that particular moment. But when you transgress your own rules, it's like, it's really, there's a reaction to that.
Yeah. Well, you broke your own rules. You created an inner conflict, and there's an understanding that there's nobody else to blame but you, because you made that rule.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so difficult.
Yeah. And
people underestimate that they can make a different rule, and other people will often respond to the rule that they've made. So often people feel stuck in other people's rules.
Yeah.
and they haven't even considered that they can change the rules of the game too. And then others have to respond to that. What would happen if you didn't react to that person trying to trigger you, or, you know?
Exactly. And that's what, so with couples, like when you work with people and they're like, they're in kind of somewhat of a pattern standard sort of conflict, like between partners, and you sort of get in there and then you put a little box, a little field around it, and you say, okay, in that moment, what's the game? What's going on? And people will give you sort of this, you know, trying to one up them. You know, I'm trying to win. And I say, okay, you know, if you win, who loses? My partner. Okay, then what happens to the relationship? Oh, the relationship loses. Okay, there's no way out of that. So and that's where the phrase like, do you want to be right or do you want to be in a relationship kind of comes because being right is one kind of game, but being in a relationship is quite different. And when people stand and they go, I'm playing the relationship game, and you say, and what wins in the relationship game? Kindness, generosity, giving people the benefit of the doubt, all these things. It's quite on the tip of people's tongue. And then I say, well, let's look at that moment that we pause and let's just look at your side of the screen. Never mind your partner. What are you doing? Are you being kind and generous and all of that? Absolutely not. And then they want to start blaming the person. You say, wait a minute, we're not just going to do that. What if you're playing to win the relationship game in that moment? What are your options? Yeah, but no, hold on. We're going to leave them out of it for now. What would you do? And then you explore these possibilities, and then they start to realize, oh, I'm playing my relationship game, and my rules are kind, generous, you know, all these things. And obviously it's not that simple. The other person has something to do with it. They do have triggers, and we can explore all that. But it's like you and people will go, I'm empowered. Yeah, you are, and you always were, but we didn't see it. And
it's often
we're doing another thing.
It's not very clear to a lot of people what their rules are. That's why the work with values is so critical and so at the core. But then it gets very intricate in terms of the details of all of these rules because they haven't been formulated. And relationships is the same at work. You know, work is relationships as well. A relationship between you and the organization, between you and other players and work. So if you were to be quite clear about what our rules are, and if the basic rules are aligned, but then they're never completely aligned. Our set of rules is never completely identical just because we're different. But like talking about what the rules are will help us to work really effectively together, whether that's in romantic relationships or in professional relationships.
There's a wonderful book, which if you haven't read, or if people who are watching this haven't read, called it Relationship Agreements. And when you say rules, I've automatically translated into agreements, because I think that's more functional.
It's a much better word,
You have two people coming together. Even when there are rules, we don't necessarily agree to them. But if we make, especially in the workplace, like if we just, look at our job description or, the corporate handbook or whatever it is, and we sign the thing, it's like, well, you have tacitly now agreed to all of that. And then that is so often the points of conflict. Yeah, but but you were in an agreement, and we supposed you were in a good faith agreement about that, but that's not kind of how we handle it. And so I think thinking of things in terms of agreements, and agreements are the product of conversation, and like it's dirty work to kind of come to agreements. And they're just because you come to agreements doesn't mean that people aren't going to transgress it, which gives rise to the need for communication. Like it's hard. It really is hard, but you have to go. And the thing about that book, the point she makes is like, our fidelity is to the agreement, not to like the other person should behave this way. It's like, I remember we were sitting here last time and we had an agreement that you would, let's say it's a workplace, that you would deliver your deliverable at noon by Friday. That was my understanding in the agreement, but it's now Saturday and it's not here yet. So what was wrong with our agreement? Like, what did we not see? And then the focus is less on the blaming and that kind of stuff. So it doesn't mean that those feelings don't arise, but it's like such a more effective way of actually being in those kind of things. But it's hard, and almost nobody I've run into has that sort of way of thinking. It's just like, yeah, but you said you'd do this. And it's like, but I didn't. But you said you did, but I didn't. But you said you, and it's like, where are we going with this? And then this language of agreements and stuff can give us it can allow us to go to the balcony and say, okay, let's reframe this. There was an agreement. Do we agree? Yes, there was an agreement. And then what happened?
And again, coaching is encapsulating that quite well, because a good coach, they will forge that agreement very carefully. They will ask for permission when something comes up. They will have a conversation at the beginning. It's like, what are the rules of this relationship? How are we going to use this space? What is okay? What is not okay? What can I do for you? What can you not do for me? What do I expect from you? What can you expect from me? And I think a lot of times, especially as organizations or as networks grow and systems become more complex, some people start making rules because they can easily put them out there and then say, if you're stepping into this arena, if you're coming into this space, here's what you need to agree to, and then there isn't a conversation because maybe it's no longer feasible at this kind of size.
Right. But because everything's changing all the time. And so are all the parties. And so it's foolish and not very aligned with the way things are to just like make rules and then just be like, there are the rules. It's like, okay, let's see how this goes.
I think it's necessary sometimes to have like a set of rules that you say, look, if you want to come play here, then these are the rules. And before you enter, it's like a kind of a sign at the beginning of like at the entrance of a playground. It's like, if you don't agree to this, please stay out of this because this is going to cause issues. This is not going to be good for you.
And I think that, I think about that in terms of just the bigger conversations about boundaries anyway, which is like boundaries exist to protect, not to oppress and not to do all that. They function to oppress and all sorts of stuff, but and when I'm talking to individuals about setting boundaries, I'm like, boundaries are an act of generosity. And especially verbal boundaries and relational boundaries, because if you don't put a boundary there, they're going to keep running their head into it and they're going to get harmed by it. And that's not fair, right? So that if you put a no here, then the person has choice. So
it's much better than to have a sign than to fall off that cliff.
And then if they fall off again and again and again, it's like, well, no wonder they're resentful. You're not doing your part here, but they don't see it that way. So you kind of have to set up the game, a little bit to do this. Can I call us back to something that excited me a little bit earlier? So you were talking about, I think it was when you said, the portfolio career thing. And what was really exciting to me about that is again, back to the finite and infinite games concept, the James Carse book. One of his sort of quips or principles in there was that when you're playing, in finite games, you play within boundaries. Like you said, time boundaries, space boundaries, rules boundaries or agreement boundaries. And when you're playing, you play with boundaries. You shift them around and you get to move them. And there's something about play, again, related to freedom, related to possibility, related to like responsiveness. Like it understands that everything is changing in here, out there, and out there all the time. And that it's to our point a minute ago, like to be able to move the boundary over here, but then to be in a conversation to agree about what the boundary is and why it's there and who it serves and how it serves is really important, back to kind of the importance of communication. But I love that idea that play is partly defined by our ability to be flexible and to move with boundaries. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Absolutely. And that just triggered as well you said something when we talked last that's still with me, and it came up a couple of times. So it's that we need to play in order to figure out where those boundaries are. Because like it's one thing to have a clearly defined and clearly ruled out and boundaried game, and it's kind of safe to play there. But like often life isn't like that. So we actually need to just go out and just do stuff, just move, not knowing what's out there and what the rules of the game are. Because when we're out there, and this kind of, it's a courageous act in a way to play, but it doesn't feel that courageous because we're just kind of moving with the flow.
Yeah.
But then we find limits to what our body can do, or we find boundaries to, oh, there's a cliff. And, maybe it's not falling, but maybe it's losing balance for a little while. And I think it's important that we play so that we can expand the playing field, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, a conversation with a client yesterday who, we got down to kind of the existential sort of concept between freedom and structure, freedom and limitation and this kind of stuff. And he was, as people often do, lamenting that he wanted to do music. He wanted to play music, like that this brought him joy. Like this was something that really it had value for him. But he didn't want to do it if he didn't feel like it. And so if he said, I'm going to play for a half an hour at 11 p.m. and he didn't feel like it, then he didn't do it. And then the next day he'd wake up and go, and then eat himself alive for not doing it. Oh, I guess I didn't, and it's like, it's this way of selling out your ability to choose and all the possibility to that kind of stuff. And so it gets into that, the existential experience of there are limitations, I would say. There just are. There seem to be, death and birth being the kind of big ones. I don't know what beyond that. It seems like, in physical space and the body is limitation and all this sort of stuff. And we need it and we hate it, at different times. And it's just developing a relationship to that concept that doesn't need it to be one or the other, and instead is willing to be uncomfortable with when we don't want the freedom and when we don't want the structure. And again, in coaching, so much of the way that I work is just not lamenting or not trying to make things be other than they are, especially the kind of existential givens, which are kind of often the stuff that people come up against, just kind of rooted in those. And instead let's just go right to the root of the existential. There is freedom, there is structure. And then watch them go, yeah, but I don't like it. And go, my response to that is, yeah, you don't like it. Like if they throw a tantrum, I throw a tantrum back to affirm them. You don't like it. It's a way of playing. You don't like it. And they go, I don't like it. You don't. No, I don't. I want it to be different. I know you do. And it's this way. So I don't go looking I don't collude with them to try to change the existential givens. Yeah. I like, how can we just be okay? Not okay with resigned to, or I prefer it, but just, it is this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just reminds me of somebody who is in that game that kind of becomes frustrating or boring. Like, I don't understand really how people get bored, because at any point in time, you can change your sets of the rules. You can stop agreeing to certain rules. And all of a sudden, things will get very exciting very quickly.
Yeah. Tim Ferriss is the best at this. I read just a small thing with him, and this is kind of his whole bag in a way, is what did he, I'll give my version. He didn't probably say this, but it's do you know that at any moment you're walking, you could just do a somersault? You could lay down in a public square and scream? You can do that. Now, this is not without consequence, whatever that consequence might be in that moment, but you can actually do that. That, since I was about 14, I realized that when I was 14, I started doing somersaults in parking lots, and I was just because I could. That's the only reason. There's a little bit of rebellion or something maybe, but I was just there's no moment. I can be in Paris or I can be in prison. I can do a somersault or a handstand, and it's smaller, the cell gets.
Something very practical that he often does, or that he's often talked about, is just ask for a refund, ask for a discount next time you get a coffee.
Yeah.
Because that's something nobody does, because we feel that there's a rule that we can't. And if we actually just do that, then often people say yes, and often they say no. But we don't even consider that there might be something. We assume so many rules where there aren't actually any rules, or the rules are not really set in stone.
Yep.
You know, so like coaches, for example, oh, I couldn't possibly ask for this much money. I couldn't possibly triple my prices. Yeah, you could. Who says?
Very good.
You can do that and see who says yes and who says no. And often people are surprised at who says yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That was Rich Litvin's little newsletter. One of his emails this week was like,
oh, yeah.
Double, triple, double it again, you know, that kind of thing. I think that's it. Like one of the hallmarks of play is that it has boundaries, but it doesn't have expectations. And expectation is a very particular internal experience, you know, and I don't know if we could like really describe what is it when we have an expectation, but it certainly sort of refers to something out there. It gives power to something out there, which it doesn't really have. Although we could talk about child development, and at a certain point, like, is there free will when you're 2 and the big people are kind of placing you into boundaries and stuff like that? So there's certainly that kind of development, but like an expectation.
I think many big people would tell you that 2-year-olds definitely have free will.
Yeah, I know. So it's like, and then the game is like, how do we? I think, well, who knows? I'm not a parent, but like, how do we give them a space? But most parents, I think, are like, safety is the first and most important thing. So we don't want them to. Ideally, we don't want them to hurt themselves or hurt others. So how can we like put a little bit of a fence around their free will, right? But then we sort of internalize that, and then we start to put the fences around our free will ourselves, and then we think that it is just so. And I think this idea of like what Tim Ferriss suggests, or somersaults in the parking lot, or whatever, is to remind people that's not true. Like, and I'll do that with clients. I'll be like, do you like watch? You can get up and you can fucking do that. You know, and you can, you know, in coaching has a little bit of this, the like CTI, they call it the skill of blurting, where you just say whatever. You just say it. And like, that's a version of it where you just go, you know, that
whatever comes to your mind.
Just like break an expectation. Yeah, exactly. And I just think do that as a practice. I mean, this is where it gets into this sort of the way I'm trying to formulate this. How could this actually be useful to coaches? Is like to, you know, it's a little like, can you give an assignment to play? But it's like, I guess with adults, you kind of like, I can give you a recommendation, and it's like these rules, like there are sort of sacred rules everywhere that we just sort of adhere to. Things should be just so. And it's like, like what might be possible if you I don't know, I'm looking at my room. Like, what if I didn't have that? What if my bookshelf was at an odd, weird angle? Like, I would experience this room differently, and then I might see new possibilities in the kind of triangle that then existed behind that. And then, oh, maybe that could be my meditation space. And I can make it like a fort, and like I've really been wanting a place that feels a little bit more private and something, and maybe, that's possible. I could really do that. But then it throws the rest of the room off. And then you have to change, and then there's a whole world kind of issue of choices and things that issues forth from that. And you just go, you could do that with anything, anything. The popular one from some of the self-help literature is like, take a different way home from your job. Just go a different way, like, or get lost in a new city. I mean, it can have this kind of precious flavor, but it's like, really, like, it'll be so uncomfortable, or so exciting, depending on how you sort of look at it. Anyway, you were about to say something.
No, I think that's something that, on the other hand, we need to keep in mind, because I think it can be easy sometimes to think, I can just like change the rules and just live radically differently. I think it is important to also consider how you're going to affect the system back, because if one person out of 100 people changes the rules and decides to behave differently within that group of 100 people, whether that's an organization or a family or whatever, it will have potentially profound effect on the whole system. The first time I've lived with like 7 other people, in a house
The
share.
first time, did you live with people multiple times with 7 people?
I lived for a number of years. I lived with a lot of different people in
Okay,
this
okay.
converted warehouse situation.
I was like, a great intro. Like the first time I lived with 7 people, I was like, wow, okay, cool.
No, there was a period of about 6-7 years in a large house share with lots of space, very exciting space. That's when I really learned about politics, because it was in a confined kind of environment and people had to get along. And there was quite a free kind of living situation, and there weren't many rules. And when we moved in, there weren't any. We just kind of made them up as we went along. And, for a while in the beginning, it worked really well. Everybody felt super free. And then we realized we need some sort of rules so we get along. And I realized it only takes one person out of 7 to fuck a really well-working system up.
Yes.
And we crafted this really quite fairly sophisticated but simple enough system to just keep the spaces clean. And it just takes one person to say they agree with it and then don't do anything, for the next person to say, well, if they're changing the rules, then I like those rules where I don't have to do anything. And all of a sudden whole systems collapse. So I think it's good to sense and recognize the kind of freedom that we can change the rules, but it will affect other people. They might adopt yours. Would that be okay with you? Or, it's good to consider what the effects are of you changing your system and how it affects the larger system.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's the way that I sort of think about it in a coaching context. For example, if I was going to request a person do somersaults or something, I mean, just like what's a rule you could break or something like that, to as a participant in that conversation who knows, who knows in that moment or is aware in that moment of the ripples, like the consequences going out. And that person might be, like I was a minute ago, just really excited about the possibility of doing this.
I could punch my boss in the face.
Exactly. I really could do that. It's like, yeah. But to sort of help and this is where I think a coach does have some agency and some responsibility in a relationship, as the one who's the holder kind of the bigger container, is to sort of, because what I'm trying to do in that initial thing, like do somersaults or lay in a square, is like, what are your own rules? What are the things that are obvious to you as reality, which just aren't? They're just not. There isn't a have to around this sort of stuff. And then what could you do to break that? So to try to keep it small and somewhat without big consequence, but to talk it through. So, I mean, do you have a shoulder injury? You might not want to be doing, these kind of things. And mostly it works, like with adults doing that. But then if they start to sort of get the taste of it and go, oh, because it's meant to facilitate an insight that maybe not every, but 17-year-old has, which is like, screw this, why is it this way and not another way? And I think it's an important thing. And then adults kind of lose that thread. And then, I think it's important to reintroduce and go, yeah, why is it this way? To be in that conversation. And then I think there's room, if the person sort of takes it up and this is a meaningful distinction in their life, and they go, you know what? And I had a client, an example, and he's like, we're just going to move to the beach. And I was like, wait a minute, but great. And let's think about that, because that's a pebble in the pond of your life that's going to ripple out to you, your wife, your children, their education, and then we just piece by piece sort of did that, because what are the consequences? What are the I don't know, what word do you use? Because consequences has a flavor. What are the, I say often what issues forth from that, or what follows from that instead of consequence? I don't know. How do you use the word consequence?
Well,
because it just means that which comes after. I mean, that's what it means. But I think people, in my experience,
I know what you mean. What does that lead to? What are the ripple? I like ripple effects.
Yeah. So just think about that in 360 degrees, and then people with most often can kind of start to go, oh, well, then I better think about this and think about this, and to try to not have them look for perfection, like, oh, if I break this rule, it's going to have an adverse effect there. And I'll say, it might, but then you can go to that moment and go, well, and if that happened, what might you do, so that they don't throw everything out just because it's imperfect.
But this is the value of the coach in that in those kind of moments where you invite somebody to paint a version of like living at the beach, for example. It's like, oh, I could like have a different life with different rules, and then instead of getting all excited and go and do it, the coach invites them to finish that image, to put some more colors to it, put some more detail to it, really explore, what's that? And what are you painting there? And what's going to go in this corner? And, there's a lot of white space over there. What's that going to be filled with? And, what's going to happen if you mix that color with that color? And this is not quite dry yet. What happens if you paint over it now? And we're not saying that that's not a good idea. We're just being super curious and inviting that person to finish the picture to an extent where they can say, I want to live in that picture.
Yeah. And I noticed too, like, I mean, I don't kind of know what your philosophies are about different personality types and stuff, but I would suggest we could say with some agreement that people do seem to have kind of patterns that they sort of are acting out, which we could call different personalities. And I noticed, like I was giving the example of the guy who wanted to play music, who's a client that I talked to yesterday, and he would be far less likely to think 8 steps forward, because thinking 8 steps forward feels like you're putting a limitation on his creativity, right? This is the world that I come from in my own life. And then there's another person who's going to obsessively like chart out what will happen. And if they find any hitch in it, then they're not going to do it at all. And so it's interesting with different kind of clients, how you kind of have to facilitate that sort of process and kind of talk to them along the way of like, okay, what could come from this? Because on the one hand, people might disregard anything that contains uncertainty, which is absurd. Or on the other hand, anything that contains structure is absurd. Like, and it's like, yeah, but we have to come back to the way things actually are. And all we're doing is we're just pretending that it is so. And then, putting on our VR goggles and looking around and going, well, what would that be like, really? And oftentimes, I mean, I think this is one of the things I've seen with coaches that they don't do, is they get sort of aligned with the client and they get very excited about the beautiful vision that they're painting. And they forget about, but where is what day do they pick up garbage in this new life? Like, where are you going to, and they forego some of the practicalities, which are the moment to moment to moment to moment things that they have to contend with, because life in wherever you go is going to end up being very much like life here in its basic sort of infrastructure or something like that for most people. And if that's the stuff that they're often wanting to escape, they have, I call it a freedom fantasy. Oh, I'm going to get a world. If I go to Bali, we don't have trash in Bali or something. Really? Like, you're going to have to poop in Bali,
That's a good quote.
That's our title.
I'd love to get a bit more practical as well. I'm just thinking, because one way of coaching that I really like, that I don't get to do very often, is coach people while they're in the game. And skiing and snowboarding is, I think, absolutely ideal for that, because you have those ways up the lift where you tend to be in the game and then you're down, and then you have reflection time and a coaching conversation as you're going up, and you see people playing. You see, usually I can see somebody's personality in the way that they ride. You can often see who somebody, like there's this Zen saying called, the way you do anything is the way you do everything.
Yeah.
And I really love that. And you can, when you're quite familiar with a particular game, you can see how people engage with the rules, especially if it's something quite creative and free as skiing or snowboarding. But you can see that. So if you spend some time playing with a client, or you're with a client in the game environment, and then you can help them reflect something back, you can have a little huddle. I really like that. And I see more and more really creative approaches from coaches who work with clients as they are playing. And then they have those huddles. It kind of reconnects the kind of coaching we do with the kind of sports coaching.
Yeah.
Because the sports coach is very much always there as their clients are playing, and we are rarely there when our clients are playing.
Yeah.
Other than in our space between you and me.
Yeah. And it's funny because I appreciate you saying that, because it's one of the things that is a bit of a frustration for me, and I don't quite know where this is. I'll pay you to coach me around this, but it's like there's a longing. I have a really vivid image of like the sports coaching metaphor of being on. Like, I love the physicalness of it, being in an environment and being there, and you're like, okay, like I just saw this, and you have people kind of reflect. What did you see? What did you okay, and then maybe this and maybe that, and then this constant iterative process of like, okay, and I think of the boxer coming, and they take out his mouth guard and they spray water in his mouth. He's like, all right. And he's like, okay, buddy, like, here's what you got to do. You got to give him the hook, like this dynamic. I mean, this is how it is to live in my head. And that there's something so rich and wonderful about that idea. And I'm longing often to bring that. It's not always appropriate, of course, but like to bring that level of like attention to the way that things are unfolding right now, because life is that intense. I mean, it's just amazing. Cell division and all. It's like, that's what I really want to support people in being able to attend to their lives, and to also be able to zoom out. Like, I think the zoom out, zoom in is really important. So for anyone thinking of working with me, it's not like I'm always there trying to, it's amazing. I'm quite happy to be quiet. But, and I wonder like how to do that. I can simulate it. And this is part of play for me. And the way that I simulate things is to ask them if I can be invited into their movie, right? They're in a movie. They're seeing things the way they see them. They're making the meaning of it that they make. I have no access to that. Or I'll say, into the raw footage of their life before they've made meetings. So I say, I imagine you've got a GoPro camera on your head, and I have no access to that footage. Can you bring me in to the footage? And then we can kind of look around together. It's almost like being in a simulated, sort of reality together. And that's how I get to that feel of it. But it's like they're reflecting on something that happened in the past. And it's often not like in the moment, although sometimes, and these are great moments in coaching, especially with like Zoom, I'll be coaching and their kid will come in and they're like, get out of here, or whatever. And no one's that rude, but like they interact with their kid, or it's quite beautiful. Oh, come on, and I'm going to talk to you and all that. And I'll just be like, wow. And then I'll ask them like, well, just tell me about that moment. That's amazing. Or what, I say amazing about everything. Like, I'm just in awe that this is all happening in the first place. What just happened? And then they'll be able to reflect and do that kind of thing. Yeah. So where I'm going with this, which is totally unrelated, is I think my ideal way of coaching would be public speaking, because they're doing a thing and they're doing it now, and we can kind of pause and what's going on and then do it again. And it's a skill. It's an actual thing that they're playing right there. Yeah. So I often fantasize about like public speaking coaching, and then I have a whole thing about why I can't do that and everything else. But that seems like the ideal like forum to kind of be on the field with them. But in the spirit of there aren't any rules, why couldn't I go to work with somebody, or ask permission to go to work with somebody and observe them and sit by them? And people like Marshall Goldberg will do that. You go just follow someone around, talk to them throughout their day. Marshall Goldsmith.
Goldsmith, yeah.
Yeah. So there, I guess you could do that. Although COVID times is a different story, that kind of stuff. I don't know. So I don't know if that's in the spirit of what you were.
Camera's getting smaller and smaller. Maybe soon we can.
True. You never know. And, we might all be cyborgs and we can just enter into other people's virtual reality.
Oh, yeah.
Have you watched Upload?
Upload, yeah, I have.
You know that project exists? Google has a company that their mission is to solve death. It's one of the alphabet companies. Like that exists, and it's how to upload consciousness into a virtual. It's the same thing. Holy shit! It's real. Like that's what they're working on. People get paid hundreds of $1,000s to be a developer on that project, and they're gathering all our data so that they can do it. Anyway, it's
quite a philosophical challenge because for an existentialist, when for years I've been talking about death being the only certainty that we have, for one of the very few. And all of a sudden, it was a 13-year-old Chuck, when I was working in schools, said, "Yeah, but sir, you're old. Like, we might find a cure for this death thing." And I wanted to argue with it, and I couldn't. And then all of these nauseating developments in nanotech, biotech, I'm like, oh my God.
I know.
It's different conversation, maybe.
Where I am today, publicly, I will say today, where I am at with that is death isn't a problem to be solved. I don't see it as a problem.
Yeah. It's an important boundary, and it doesn't mean that after it is nothingness. There might be something, and there probably will be something at some point. I don't know. We don't know. But a boundary doesn't mean an end. It just means it's a boundary.
Important. Yeah, and I'm like, as I get older, and that inevitability is closer, I get like, well, I'm a little bit more curious than I am terrified. I mean, I go between both, but it's like, I don't know, I might be kind of into that. I don't know. I mean, I'm not eager, and I'm enjoying what's happening here. But
I like coaching cheeseburgers, and I'm kind of into death lately.
Like, the only thing is, it's just like so dry. We talk about going off the ledge. It's like if I could just vacation there, but I don't think so.
Well, holiday is not the same as immigration. Careful. But hey, we've been talking for a little while. I think, unless you've got something else that you could unload on our fellow coaches or interested other folk, I'd love to kind of bring this to a close. I said I have a couple of questions for you that I tend to ask all of my deep diving, talking about coaching guests. But is there something else that you've kind of had, or anything else that you wanted to say?
Well, I've got about 2 more hours of material here. So the one thing, I mean, I think that there's kind of a distinction that I just wanted to put out there, and then maybe we could just bat it back and forth, and then go into the end of it. So is like, I think this isn't terribly profound, but I think in our language, we tend to make work opposed to play. Play and work somehow are opposed. And I want to really call that into call bullshit on that. Good. Like that is a distinction that we have, and it's created, and it's sort of an agreement we have, but there's no existential basis for that different. And I would say play is something more, if we had to make an opposite or an alternative to it, it's more like play and unawareness, or play and disconnection, or something like that. So when you were asking before about the spirit of play, it's or play and lack of possibility, which then if we do look at work, I think people do often relate to work as this
have to that we
pointed to earlier. And that we don't play in it, and that work, the way that we think of it, those places, those relationships that comprise that thing in our life called work, suffer as a result of not having a spirit of play, because we think of play as frivolous, or we think of it as child, related to our associations with the word mean that we don't usually bring it into that. And then that suffers as a result, when in fact, and I think there's some, the kind of focus right now on innovation and creativity and bringing improv into the workplace and stuff is a move in that direction. Except I think there's a bigger problem with that, in some ways maybe an unsolvable problem, because it's still about just being more productive. It's still this business game that people are playing unreflectively. It's a little bit messy, but I'll put that out there, and I don't know if there's any more to say.
But I think that's really, really good. That's why I like strength, working with strength so much, because if we can meet work with an attitude of play, then it stops being a have to. It might still be a have to somewhere, as however we define that. But like if you draw on your strength, whatever they may be, or creativity, or kindness, or any of your values in action, then work becomes something that we can intrinsically engage in, because the strength that we're using, and it's almost always possible to engage in what you have to do with using or utilizing something that you intrinsically enjoy using.
And we have that phrase, right? Play to your strengths. I mean, I think that's meaningful. Think about that. As you said that, I think about my. And there's so much more we could say, but like part of my career has been in organizations, and part of my career has been kind of independent. And I think, when I think about going into an organization and being somebody just playing out somebody else's mission, that's how I think about it. Like that, I don't like that at all. And if I'm going to refer back to Viktor Frankl, I could be happy in that sort of environment, depending on kind of how I relate to it. And there's this choice that I've made that's like, if I have the opportunity to make up my own game, in essence, and I don't entirely make up my own game because capitalism, because laws, because, that's it. But I've accepted sort of those big fences around my life. Then I'm going to be more able to make mistakes without a lot of consequence, in the way that play does. And I'm going to be able to there's a freedom in that conduces more to my happiness. And I'm going to die. I don't have all the time in the world. And one of the things that needed to happen internally for me in order to make that shift and really get comfortable with the kind of game that I'm playing now is to just drop the expectation that I should be somebody who can operate well inside of an organization. Because now I believe I can be, and I'm choosing not to focus my attention on building the capacity and skills I would need to be really skillful and happy in an organization. And I just say, I just won't do it. And if I had to, if my family required that I did it, or the consequences, we wouldn't eat or lose our mortgage or whatever, I'd be willing to. So it's not like a rigid boundary, but it's like, it's just a shift. So anyway, there's something about in the narrative or the arc of my life, just making decisions. Like I'm going to choose some games over others just because. And I don't know, that seems sort of trite, but it seemed very important that I express that.
Yeah. What do you want to play? I mean, it's a question I often dreaded, because it usually was, you had to take some commitment. You had to make a commitment, and if you committed to playing Risk, the Monopoly, then you would be sitting there for hours and hours, and you want to make a careful choice as to what game you're getting involved in. Because sometimes it means that there's a substantial part of your life that you're going to be playing that game now. That's why it's can be a difficult decision to make, especially if it's choosing a career, which is, moving into a certain playing field. It's takes some time to develop the skills to be able to play. And it's harder to just kind of get involved in a different game, because you have to learn the rules first, and you have to develop some skills in order to play at a higher level.
And I think that focus that we've been talking about on the infinite game is so important, so that like the infinite game can be taken into any finite game, and every finite game is going to have a certain field of play and certain rules and stuff like that. But if you're focused here, you're never going to have to give up playing the infinite game. And when I talk to clients about that, I'm like, once you do this, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, it's without consequence which finite game you play, but it's kind of like, play the corporate game. It's like, okay, great, because I know I'm going to be tethered to this more internal game that is infinite and is more about me and my relationship to emptiness or God or whatever it is. And that is like, I can wake up every day and feel really excited about that. Well, that's a good place to end. Cut.
Fantastic. Oh, this is so inspiring. I love it. Great. Anybody's listening to this, I'd absolutely love to hear what you're taking from this, how you apply this, how it relates to your coaching work, or what kind of games you're playing, because there's a million different things running in my mind, and I have the opportunity to just kind of engage with Eric. We both love to hear from people about this. If you have any thoughts, if any of this resonates, if it affected the way that you coach, we'd love to hear about it. So depending on which medium you're engaging in this, let us know. Eric, I said I got a couple of questions for you. You said, don't tell me before I could say anything. Respond as quickly or as longly. What's the opposite of quickly?
I like that. We've just added longly.
Cool, longly.
Like Trump's bigly. Bigly and longly. Very good.
Bigly comes to my mind every now and then. I'm like, no. I don't want bigly.
Don't want it. I don't want it.
Somebody you don't know asks what you do at a dinner party. What do you tell them?
You know what the first thing that comes to mind is not my thought. It's Michael Neal's thought, or Rich Litvin's or something. It's like, I create miracles. But that's not it. And I actually have an aversion to that. So let me rethink and see. Somebody asked me at a dinner party, what do I do? I actually answer, I'm a coach, because I want to see where that leads.
Oh, the Tony Robbins kind.
Yeah, and they go, oh, like what sport? And I say, that's not what I mean.
All right, great.
And then they say, well, what do you mean? I say, I do it, life coach, yeah, which I don't like quite like that language, but and they say, oh, a life coach. And sometimes they just leave. And then sometimes
that's what I'm afraid of. That somebody.
My auntie is a life coach. She was in HR for 70 years, and then she became a life coach. And I go, cool. So I kind of I open up little doors and give them, feed them crumbs and sort of, do you really want to be in this conversation? Because the real answer is this conversation. Right. You know what I mean? And I don't want to hit them over the head with that, because I'm like, are we going there? Because I got, I love this. It's a way of being in the world. It's not like a job or something. So, and that's a little bit heavy hitting for most people. So I say I'm a coach. And
interesting. Yeah, I'm always afraid a bit to say that. I mean, every now and then I say that. I think for the same reasons as you say, because let's see how somebody's actually interested. But I'm so worried that somebody might just say, okay. Yeah. And then they leave. And then I don't know. They have no idea who I am or what I do. But there's so many connotations with what a coach is or a life coach. And, But thank you. Next question. Do you think the coaching profession should be regulated? Or do we need more regulation is maybe a better question.
No, but we need clearer agreements.
Between?
Wherever coaching happens. So I don't mean to be vague, but I think clients and coaches need to have clear contracts, clear agreements. I think organizations that utilize coaching need to have clear agreements with their coaches, and then the coaches with the clients. And I think any body like the ICF or something that's sort of staking out a claim and putting a chalk line around something called coaching needs to have clear agreements, and that those need to be evolving conversations instead of rules and regulations. And I'd like to see how far we can get with that. I think I work a lot with people that are trained as therapists, and I see how integrated diagnostic language is and a certain way of seeing people, even among people who are very skilled and very wonderful people. There's a default to seeing people as patients or whatever, instead of evolving existential creatures that are dynamic and all of this. And I think coaching has the benefit, but the downside too of the answer might come from anywhere. The chalk line isn't quite closed. We're still bringing things in. And my idea and part of my training is I want coaching to be the most effective response to the human predicament or experience or to suffering as possible. I wanted to include everything that could possibly be helpful, but I think oftentimes, people start throwing solutions out there that there's no agreement, like it's based in evidence or something like that.
So then it needs to be integrated, because what a person might need to move forward, sometimes it's the kind of coach that says, give him a right hook. Like when he does that, then you need to do that.
Yep.
And maybe that's exactly what they need to move forward effectively or successfully. But sometimes it's like, so what do you think? What just happened? So I think coaching allows for that kind of integration, and it gives the coach some freedom, and too much regulation will stifle that kind of freedom to give the client what they need at the time.
I agree. I think there's a whether I think it should be this way or should be that way. I think I would say there's a great benefit when it's handled well and with tethered to the way things actually are, the existential givens. There's a great benefit to the flexibility that an unregulated thing can do. But if that group of people aren't also in a meaningful conversation about what is this, then it can be problematic. And I think oftentimes the conversation defaults to what's the right way? That's just sort of our bifurcated brain going, well, is it right or is it wrong, or is it good or is it bad? Is it coaching or is it therapy or something like that? And I think there's actually a bigger chalk line, which is addressing the problem of human suffering. And I think, and that brings in all sorts of stuff, but it's already leaking in. I mean, how many coaches have sort of a line into kind of spiritual practices and, and into scientific, scientific process and everything else. So that's my long answer to
Thank you. There might be another long answer coming, but I'm always hoping for a short one. If somebody asks you about the difference between coaching and therapy, what would you say?
I get asked this almost every day. So what do I say? I give different answer depending on the context, actually, because one, I work in an organization or work with an organization or contract with an organization that contracts with companies, and the organization that I contract with offers both therapy and coaching. So this is a relevant question. So I give the company's answer,
which is
that I contract with, which is at this place, we have agreed that therapy is a longer term, so it's a time bound. It's a longer term intervention that includes or that sort of looks to the deeper roots for patterns that are sort of happening here. So patterns that have emerged out of family dynamics and things like that, or through traumatic experience and things like that. Things that coaches, as a general rule, aren't trained in the distinctions of, and so it's just not within my capacity to do it. So that's sort of a mix, actually. So that's one answer. I think in my private practice or my outside of the organization, my answer is something like it's a little bit more intuitive, because if the person is coming in with what I've learned to be some of the external manifestations of past trauma or really intense trauma. So family, if like a disorganized attachment style, or like a war trauma or something like that hasn't ever been addressed. I kind of have a line in the sand where I just say, I might be totally appropriate for you to work with, and I will not. And I'm okay with that. And if they say, why not? Because it's that way, and I can refer you out, because I don't want to sign up for something that I feel like could very well, if they're going to do the kind of work that I am accustomed to doing, would open up stuff that I would be irresponsible to sort of think that I know, even though in the moment I'd feel comfortable. The truth is I'd really be outside of a boundary of my own training or language. So I try to just be in a conversation with the client and just level with them as much as I can. And sometimes people come in and it's just really, really obvious. And I've made mistakes too. I've been like, this person has war trauma I didn't know. And they're suffering sort of PTSD symptoms now that we've been working together. And I go, oh, okay. And then we just have to have a conversation. So I don't also feel like I have got to get it right working with clients right away, but I want to be, it's never a closed question. That was like a medium long. It wasn't long. Yeah. It wasn't as longly as I could have answered.
Oh, I haven't responded yet. I think we could sketch this out for another few hours, but that's a different conversation.
Well, is there anything in that like, I mean, just to
for sure. There's lots in
that you have that like that I am not thinking about.
Well, I like the kind of friend of mine, Nash Popovich, once put a model forward in personal consultancy. He said, well, there's kind of 3 starting points to that conversation. One is the kind of time focus, as in coaching. There's a trend to work with the present and future, whereas therapy works with the past and present. Not always true, but maybe a good starting point. There's certainly a trend.
That's okay. It's serviceable.
Yeah, there's one that is surface and depth, the kind of behavior versus character transformation. That, it could be another useful distinction, not always true. There's lots of coaches who work at great levels of depth. But again, a good starting point. And there's the viewing your clients as resourceful and whole versus, ill, suffering, disordered, or broken in some way. And again, lots of therapists don't view their clients in that way at all. But there's generally a trend that you seek out therapy and counseling when there's something wrong or you're trying to mend or heal something. Whereas coaching, it's already kind of okay. Again, certainly not always applicable. Lots of, I hate the word broken people, but lots of people who are suffering approach coaches because they want to avoid the stigma of therapy. And then it becomes very messy. But I think when you take those 3 together, it's a useful way to start thinking about the differences.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's maybe the best we can do. Like I said, like be in a conversation about it, keep asking that question and not with a mind, but in order to keep playing and not in order to finally end the conversation once and for all. And I get like struggle when I used to say something like coaching is about possibility, not pathology. Like that was kind of a quip and okay, there's some use
sounds great.
And it sounds great. Right. And, I mean, it does sound pretty good generally, but also like I see coaches who won't even say the word problem. And I think, well, you're not listening to your client. They do have a problem from their perspective, the way that they see it. Like that's important. They have a problem. So why wouldn't I step into their world, agree with their language? It's just that I also know.
No, it's an opportunity.
Right. It's like maybe, and I don't have to, force that change. Like, oh, it doesn't, that's about me then. Instead of the client, instead of go, oh, it's a problem. Like, how is it that this is occurring to you as a problem? That's a fascinating question. I don't understand. And I'm back to being the dumbest person in the room. Like, I've never heard problem. Like, how could that be?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the most important thing is the one that you already mentioned. It's like, what's your sense of, did I just cross a line? That's what I usually tell my clients. I'm like, I know there's a line, and when I cross it, then I'm in a space where I'm not the best person for you to work with. It's not that you're too broken or I'm not skilled enough or whatever it is. It's just like, there's a line that I can't quite define, but I definitely feel it when it happens. And when that line is crossed, like when we cross that line, I commit to bringing that up and say, remember that line we talked about? I think we just crossed that. And let's talk about how we move forward now.
Because you have an agreement with yourself and then with the client in the contracting that you do to sort of, I will point out when I get that feel. And part about, like the tradition I come from, like coach way of being, it's like my year of training was about shaping my own way of being. And part of that is paying attention to those kind of hits and not needing to question them or to make them adhere to some sort of, reason. You just go, I'm just outside my comfort zone. I've crossed the chalk line of the game that I play called coaching. And you say, and so now what do we do? And like I mentor also, And it's like, I want to be really clear if I'm coaching. Well, actually, in mentoring, I think can include coaching, but coaching can't include mentoring. So if I'm coaching and I cross the line and I want to say something that's mentoring, I just say, look, we have to turn off coaching here. And we create an agreement in the moment as best as I can. And then I say, okay. And then we go outside, we close the coaching door. The ICF cameras can't see anything. And then we do a little mentoring and say, we're done with this, but now we want to go back into this place and I'm going to shift. So I think as a coach to become, the boundary is in here, is in your ability to make observations about where those chalk lines are crossed and then be willing to speak it and to negotiate and to not be attached to whether they want to go there or they don't want to go there. And then just be flexible. And this is what, to bring it all forward, I think practicing play and like practicing going to the edges this way and that way and up and down and all makes you a lot more comfortable in the territory and makes you a lot more able to observe where boundaries are and then to be able to say, hey, I'm going to go from being this to this and doing this to this. And it takes a while, but it's worthwhile.
It begs an interesting question that we maybe not get into it, but it just kind of came up for me when you mentioned, oh, now I'm outside of my comfort zone. It begs the question whether when a coach goes outside of their comfort zone, is that a dangerous space? Is that a particularly exciting space? Because when client and coach are outside of their comfort zone and they're both are out playing beyond the boundaries that they know, I haven't quite made up my mind up, but like it's like kind of Rich Litwin talks about fearless coaching and being really bold when you're with your clients and like not quite sure whether you should ask that question and just asking it, or what you mentioned earlier, that kind of blurting when something comes to your mind, you just follow your intuition, but you're like, that doesn't, I've never asked that kind of question before.
It's helpful to have like a really paranoid mind like mine, because I've spent so much time in worst case scenarios, from like, oh, the client won't like me, to the client fires me, to the client sues me, to they throw me in jail, to like I'm penniless.
But we want to keep them safe.
Whatever.
I don't worry about the client firing me so much as what if my client gets affected in ways that brings them harm or others, and I take some responsibility for that by not by operating outside of where I know I can deliver safe practice.
Like what kind of harm? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but my mind selfishly goes to the thing I said. So now I'm like, but what would the harm be and how would we come to know it?
First thing that came to my mind is, why are you still with her? Why are you still married? And then they break up with him and then they regret it. And you were quite a strong influence in like, the way you phrased it, the way it just kind of came out and you allowed it to just come out is like, you need to get the fuck out of that relationship, mate. Yeah.
So it's interesting because I have like a little bit of a buffer that I bring in anytime that's the thought, because I do have thoughts like that, but that I would never say, and I doubt,
that's not coaching.
Maybe you would, but like, I wouldn't say that, but I would say, I just had a thought and I think it would be really interesting to pretend that somebody said that. And then I want to, how
would you relate to it?
What are the ripples? How would you relate to it? So that they know we're just playing a little game here. It's because I'm not attached to that. I already know my perspective is it doesn't matter. Do you know? But like, or it's not the reality of it. But if I treat it as a playful possibility, but then I have to frame it up in that moment. It's just a playful possibility, and then ask permission, and then we do it, and then we go, "What happened?"
Absolutely.
And then go, "Oh my God, I got really thinking." And I go, "What do you think about that?" And all that. Then do you see?
But this is such an elegant solution to people just kind of following their intuition. If they recognize their intuition and then place the intuition on the table as something that we can explore together. And I think that's with enough coaching, it just comes out like that. But in the beginning, when coaches are starting out, they want to follow that intuition and they want to say the thing.
Then you need a rule: don't give advice, and that it's there to protect you. But then after you're kind of beyond that rule, you've integrated that rule, you want to question it and go, but why not? Like, what if it would really serve people? And then the next is like, but what if it would really harm people? And then, this is sort of the solution currently that I've come up with to be like, how could I do something that would get the benefits of potential service, but, limit the potential harm, and then to kind of do it. And it does come out pretty quickly, because I know, because I've observed my own mind enough and I've messed it up enough to know, like, that's just a thought. That's just another possibility. It's not like that's real. That's the reality of it. I just go, oh, that came. And then I go, well, what about this? Not like it's real or not like it's the real thing, but like, what do you think about that? Because it is a possibility. They could break up with the person or not. And it's like, I'm going to use that because a guy came in yesterday talking about this is his dilemma. I love it.
Well, that was definitely a much longer answer. What are some of the books or people, or maybe one book or person that had a significant impact on your coaching work?
Honestly, the one that comes to mind, this could be its own, the Coach's Bookshelf. We could have a whole podcast just about that. I'll give you two, maybe three of different kind of genres. Number one is by the founder of New Ventures West, James Flaherty. It's called Coaching, Evoking Excellence in Others. It's Save Yours, the best book on coaching I still have ever read, because it totally reframes it from something like coactive coaching. It's a very different approach. I love James's book. Number two, as a philosophical ground and an infinite game playing book, the Daodejing. It's timeless wisdom that I can never get enough out of.
Is there a particular translation that you like?
Stephen Mitchell. Yeah. And then The Developing Mind by Dan Siegel, which is just,
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, read it. It started as a memoir, apparently, and then he rewrote it as like his. So he's a interpersonal neurobiologist. So how we become ourselves in relationship to others. It's a dynamic, multidisciplinary field of study, and that's kind of his sort of foundational text on it, and to learn how the human mind develops in that way in relationship to caregivers and then other people, and then how that leads to maybe pathological behavior. He's kind of in more maybe in this psychology world, but his work is just, all of it is really great. So those three.
Excellent.
I'll limit for that.
What's next? Did you notice any current or future trends in coaching that you find particularly interesting or worrying, or that you just recognize?
Yeah, I'm in one of those trends, which is the arising of platforms that contract with companies to provide coaching for employees. It's interesting because the one that I'm work for is called Lyra Health. It's a mental health intervention. It frames coaching as part of a mental health spectrum for people who aren't clinical, according to the psychometrics. We coach them. Great. And then there's platforms like Better Up, which are through like people, how do I improve my work or something like this? So it's interesting that coaching is even called, it's the same word, but it's different things depending on the different platforms. And there are other ones that are emerging as mental health platforms, and other ones that, so there's this development, but I think it gives people like me who weren't ready, or in whatever way ready, to sort of build the practice and be an entrepreneur, the ability to make a living doing coaching that we wouldn't have to do, because I don't do my business development and I don't have a niche. Who walks through the door, I coach you. And I just love that. And I think that's, it's a wonderful possibility. I think there's inherently problems with it, just because, but I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah. Cool. Without breaking confidentiality, obviously, but tell us about your most memorable coaching client, or a particularly memorable coaching client.
Hmm.
We can park that.
I'm sort of like, there's the tyranny of the urgent. Like I'm thinking about people sort of right now.
I've had that at some point. I went completely blank when a client, a prospect at the end asked me about clients like her.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll give the answer I can give you is something like the profile of somebody. And it's somebody who's really come to the edge and they don't know that they've come to the edge. And that the edge is defined by their lack of awareness about the existential questions. Like they thought they had answers to them that were prepackaged and they have been living according to those and all that. And they've realized that those are insufficient for them to engage in their life in a way that they want to engage. And so I always find it most rich and exciting when people are they think that they're really in a kind of hopeless place because they don't have this language or anything, and they come in kind of in that sense, even though it could show up as I'm procrastinating, or it could show up in any of the ways that these things show up. But that's kind of what it's about, and they find a kindred spirit and somebody who's I've been flailing in emptiness for 20 years, and it's okay.
Was there a moment when they got to realize, or when these boundaries crumbled, or like when they found themselves at the edge? Do you remember how that happened?
Like in the coaching or in their life? No, I mean, it's kind of, I'm sort of painting a pretty picture after the messy business of kind of doing it. I don't think it happens in a big aha, but we just start turning, there's a lot of moments in coaching where I just say, well, is it so? I mean, and they go, no. And I say, okay, well then we have to that has to become part of the environment, that isn't true. We don't know. We never are certain, and they go, oh my God. But then I'm there to be with them as they sort of explore the terror that can kind of come up, and then like give them a little something to kind of sink their teeth into and maybe work with. And then it slowly transforms over time. Something.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you've seen so many thousand people, but like the question I have here is, have you ever had to stop working with a client? And I guess what I'm asking is the kind of, not just referring somebody to where there's a better fit, but like, I cannot continue working with this person. This has to stop.
No.
All right. Cool. This one is a cool one. If you could take,
I'm gonna pause. I'll take this one, and then I've got a client. So.
All right. By the way, what's your next client? I know we contracted 2.5 hours right now.
Yeah, it's in a minute, but I want to answer this question.
Oh, well, if you could take over the screen of any person or group of people for 30 seconds, could be the whole world, could be one person, and you have their undivided attention for a minute, what would you tell them?
Oh man, I tell them so many things. I want to bring it down to something that we've been talking about. Like, possibility exists. And I say that not very deliberately. I don't say anything is possible. That's nonsense. Possibility exists.
Lovely. Eric, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they got excited
LinkedIn. I don't really like websites, and I don't really need one. So I'm on LinkedIn.
I'll post your link in the show notes that we have in some format. Cool. Eric, I'll let you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This is amazing.
Such a treat. I really appreciate it. And let's connect offline
we do the coaching bookshelf at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Eric,
right,
bye-bye.
Bye.